we're going to talk about arc length. So arc length is different from arc measure. Arc measure measures the degree of the arc. Arc length, it measures kind of like the part of the circumference, right? And so we're going to start by finding the circumference, right? So here, circumference. Okay, so we're going to find the circumference of this circle. And we're going to find the whole circumference. So remember, circumference, we can either do as 2 pi r, or we can do circumference is pi times diameter. So we're going to go with diameter. So here, my radius is 15, which means my diameter is 30. So my circumference is 30 pi. And so then the second part is, we're trying to figure out what is the length of, well, let's label here. So we'll go with A, B, C, D, and E. Sorry. So I want to find the length of arc DC or CD. Okay. So the very first thing is I first have to figure out what is the arc measure or the central angle measure of DC, right? And so to do that, remember this, from D to B, that's the diameter. And so that's 180, correct? And so if we subtract the 60, that leaves me with 120 degrees for the arc measure of DC, right? That's what we're trying to find. And so since the arc measure of DC, think about it. So we're not looking for the whole circumference. We're just looking for this little part, right? So it's part of the circumference, not the whole thing, just part of it. And so to find that part of it, we're going to do a little proportion, right? And so this is what I mean. So think about it this way. So the entire circle measures 360 degrees, right? So if I were to do a whole circle, that's 360, correct? But we don't want the whole circle. We just want 120 degrees of that circle, right? We only need 120 degrees of that circle. And so if we do a little simplifying here, 120 over 360, that is the same thing as saying 1/3. Okay, so we want 1/3 of this circle, right? Now, for the arc length, remember, we're looking for the measure of this part of the circumference. And so really, I know the entire circumference is 30, right? But we don't want the whole 30. We just want 1/3 of that 30. And so that's why we multiply this 1/3, because that's what the arc measures. So we're going to multiply that 1/3 times the entire circumference to give me this little part of the circumference, which is the part that I need, right? And so here, 30 pi times 1/3, the 30 divided by 3 simplifies down to 10 pi. And so the arc length then is 10 pi. Okay. And so we can kind of generalize this because it's going to be the same for every single time, right? So arc length is simply, we'll go with L equals for arc length. The measure of the arc, we'll call it M, over 360, which is, that's the ratio of it, that's part of it, times C. Okay, so let's identify something. So what does L represent? L represents the arc length. What does M represent? M represents the measure of the arc. So arc measure. But remember, arc measure is the same thing as your central angle, right? And in this case, C is going to equal the circumference. And there's two formulas, I guess you can say, that we can use for circumference, which is 2 pi r or pi times diameter.